Recovering from riots, the UK investigates what brought out the worst in its extreme right wing. False claims of a Muslim migrant committing murder sparked days of violent scenes like these, with many injured, buildings and businesses attacked, and others fearing for their lives. The UK is looking to charge rioters with terrorism. But can the underlying racism and xenophobia be fixed? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. The UK has had to come to grips with a contingent of far-right protesters or rioters who most Britons would rather believe didn't exist. Recent scenes outside facilities hosting asylum seekers shocked the nation, with one group threatening to burn down a hotel with migrants inside. So what brought them to this appalling level of violence? Well, some blame the press, social media, politicians. Even Elon Musk is being accused of provocation after blaming the government and posting "Civil war is inevitable" on his X account. Here's a look now at what happened and what's being done to address it.
It's the worst wave of riots to hit the UK in 13 years. In the past week, thousands of far-right protesters have targeted asylum centres, mosques and people of colour in multiple cities, mostly across England. It began on July the 29th, when 3 girls were murdered in a stabbing attack at a Taylor Swift-themed yoga and dance workshop in Southport near Liverpool. 8 others were injured in the incident, which was allegedly carried out by a 17-year-old boy. Police were quick to clarify that the incident was not terror-related, but a deluge of misinformation followed. Non-mainstream news websites claimed the boy was a Muslim immigrant who had recently arrived in the UK illegally by boat. He was, in fact, a Christian who had been born in the UK of Rwandan parents. But far-right groups seized on the misinformation, spreading it through the encrypted Telegram messaging app. A day after the murders, as a peaceful vigil was held in the streets of Southport, hundreds of supporters of the far-right English Defence League converged, and violent clashes broke out, injuring 50 police officers, causing yet more terror in this usually quiet seaside town.
I feel unsafe to stay in Southport really. Before I just feel okay because it's quiet area and I never seen in Southport happen. And now I'm just thinking about future what's gonna be happen. So yeah. So it's gonna be this situation now for make us create this very big issue.
The following day, UK police charged the 17-year-old with murder, and due to the torrent of misinformation provoking far-right agitators, the judge took the unprecedented step of releasing the teenager's name and background detail. But this didn't stop anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim violence spreading across England, hitting successive towns and cities over a number of days. The newly installed Labour government pledged a swift and stern response.
Crime is crime, and so to that end, I can announce today that following this meeting, we will establish a national capability across police forces to tackle violent disorder. These thugs are mobile, they move from community to community, and we must have a policing response that can do the same.
So far, over 400 people have been arrested, with at least 140 of them charged with violent disorder. Some have already been sentenced to over 2 years in jail, but this is just the start of a government crackdown. More arrests are expected over the coming days and weeks as police pore over CCTV footage to identify the rioters. And there are growing calls to charge the worst offenders with terrorism offences, which will lead to far longer sentences. There will also be close scrutiny of the role of fake news websites and social media outlets. Even Elon Musk weighed in during the week, parroting the far-right accusation that so-called two-tier policing exists across the UK. The term is used to suggest that far-right protesters are dealt with more harshly than people of colour, immigrants or those from the left of the political spectrum. On Wednesday, big crowds gathered in London and other cities to stage peaceful anti-racism counter-protests. But the UK remains on edge. More rioters are being sentenced on a daily basis, with some of the hearings being televised to deter the others, and police have been placed on high alert over the prospects of further riots this weekend. Muslim and immigrant communities remain fearful of further attacks, while many more wonder about the long-term damage done to community relations following this week of violence.
So has the UK properly diagnosed what led to these riots and how to prevent them from happening again? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Cornwall, former independent member of the EU Parliament and director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Woolfe. From Florence, a former Labour MP, Roger Casale. And in London, Imam Ajmal Masroor. Thanks all so much for being with me. Roger, I'll start with you, because for you, these are thugs. It sounds like almost a reincarnation of racist football hooligans who are seeking violent confrontation. And the solution now is to treat them like the criminals that they are. So do you think the right steps are being taken?
Good morning, Andrea. Yes, I do think the right steps are being taken. I think it's excellent that the first convictions have already taken place, that courts are sitting through the night, that there is the arrangements being made so that the rioters cannot outnumber the police, that social media firms are being talked to. I think that's right. But you use the word, is that the, and I do think these, the perpetrators of these, what are crimes, are criminals. Their actions are criminal actions, and it turns out that 70% of those who've been arrested previously had criminal records. But when you say, is this the solution to the problem? No, this is what we need to do in the next few days to get on top of the violence. And after that, I think there's a lot of thinking and talking to do, and we'll have to work this out together.
Okay, so you're talking about what to do now in the next coming days, but what do you think could have been done before? Should this have been seen beforehand, that this potential was there for such violent outbreaks, such life-threatening violence, really?
Well, we may find one of our panelists and others who say that they foresaw it. I certainly didn't, and I don't know anybody who did. I think actually that this has been a very long time coming. I think this has been decades in the making. And I think this is, if something positive can come out of this, I think it's a moment to press the reset button on the conversation we have in the UK about migration.
Interesting. Stephen, let me come to you. Because, well, according to Roger, they weren't necessarily prepared for the moment when the violence occurred. But you also seem to feel there's more of a historical context here, and people are actually ignoring what the government has done or hasn't done, really, over the last 30 years or so, and failing to address the needs of poverty-stricken, working-class white communities. So explain how you think the government failed to address why they are upset.
Okay, well, it does go back a long way. I agree with Roger. I didn't expect me to do so when we talk about the fact that nothing's been done for quite some time. I have believed that this would occur. And the reason why is I was born in Moss Side, mixed-race family to a single-parent mother in an area that in 1981 we had race riots there, and they weren't expected. I saw it with my own eyes, and straight away, the government dealt with that by looking at the causes of the issue and injected over £400 million into trying to rebuild those poor areas of Manchester. And that's what this government and previous governments, and believe me, the Conservatives have been just as bad at this. They failed to understand that the economic impact and the population issues of mass migration on the cities and towns across the country. After the 1981 riots, I read The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell that talked about the huge poverty in the north of England. If you look at the top 10 cities, apart from Jaywick in the south of England, the majority of impoverished towns in the north of England are in the north of England, but most of them are the white communities. In the south, you have Plymouth, for example, Portsmouth, Southampton. The vast majority are white people, and that's unusual. I can talk around and look on one side of my family white and the other side of my black. My brother was talking about this only the other day. The governments have not understood the same causes that George Orwell was writing about in 1937 are here today, but they're getting exacerbated. So I'm not
Okay.
surprised that
Well,
people have finally said enough's enough.
Okay, let me ask Ajmal if you also see this as a massive failure of the government just not being proactive, ignoring problems that they should have addressed beforehand.
Thank you for inviting me. I'd like to say first that what we saw up and down the country in terms of this riot, I call them race riot. Again, some thugs, most of them having criminal records from the past, targeting the Muslim community, singling out mosques. So I think there is a lot more to it than what Stephen was trying to say earlier on, racializing it in this way, and that is that white people are disenfranchised, they're upset, they're angry because they're poor, and therefore they somehow have some justification to come out and cause riots on our streets, attack individuals, vandalize streets, destroy cars, attack our police officers, the very police officers that need and give so much of their time to protect our communities. I think it's very shallow when we analyze it and racialize the problem. I stood in the last parliamentary election in Bethnal Green and Stepney in Tower Hamlets in London, the most deprived, poorest borough in the country. The largest number of people on benefit live in Tower Hamlets, and the largest number of social homes is in Tower Hamlets. But people of Tower Hamlets, Bangladeshis who live there in the large number, and Somalis, don't come out on streets rioting and burning police cars, attacking buildings or places of worship such as a church or a synagogue. They don't do that. And if they did, my God, Stephen would be the first one to invite terror charges, invite all sorts of wrath to fall on our community. I'll tell you one thing. What's happened in this particular scenario in the UK is nothing short of some individuals, Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage and likes, I know they're not here, but it needs to be said, it's on public record, stoking up the fire of hatred, and many other independent voices from the far right championing this and really giving oxygen and credence to such awful, vile thoughts that they have the right to attack. They have the right to go and target a hotel, come and attack a mosque. So I'll say these are racist terrorists, they're thugs, and they should be dealt with. I'm very glad that Labour government expedited the proceedings in the courts. I'm very glad that the charges are coming out very quickly. And the real profile of these thugs, 70% of them with criminal records. You know what? The truth is they're not only unemployed, but they're not even employable because they have got that record and they're coming out onto the street causing thuggery, mayhem and violence. So there is no justification for it. There is no philosophical underpinning to it. And there is no justification of poverty or anything else. If we do that, then we are glorifying their behavior and there is no room for that.
Okay. Ajmal, well, you know what? First, let me get Stephen's response, because you were addressed directly there.
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's very fair for Imam to suggest that if people in Bangladesh were rioting in the same way that I would suggest there would be terror charges. I don't believe this is terrorism. I've come out actually actively and said that nothing should be done other than the use of criminal law. But 77.5% of all people claiming universal credit in April 2024 are from the white ethnic group. And these are just facts. All you can do is put out the
80% of the British population are white ethnic.
All you can do, Imam, is I'm responding to your point, is talk about the facts that these people are living in and trying to address them. And I've also accepted that there is thuggery out there that should be and has been properly dealt with. But this has a historical context about it. Unfortunately, my assessment of it is that similar to that of George Orwell, who's always said that there is an elitist snobbery in this country that prefers those of foreign countries to those of the white working class. There's these quotes directly from that of The Road to Wigan Pier. And it's sad that we have this level of snobbery in this country. My point is that if we want to try and have an inclusive nation, we must also look at the causes of why people are upset. And it's not simply, as the Imam suggests, that some of these people are unemployable. Ask your questions why they're unemployable. Why is it that most white children now are less likely to go to university than those of, say, for example, the Chinese or Indian community? Why is it that white working class boys are less likely to be employed? Is it because of what's happening in their towns? Now, again, if we address those issues, then at least we go some way to identifying some of the causes. doesn't mean that we don't deal strongly and harshly with those who perpetrate the offences that we saw.
Okay, let me ask Roger then, if you know, as a former Labour MP, is that right? I mean, because if you're not addressing those issues that you seem to agree with Stephen on, these collective issues, cumulative issues, I should say, of decades now, you know, what is the end game? Does it ultimately get worse?
Well, I hope it doesn't get worse than what we're seeing at the moment. In fact, I think what I hope is that something actually positive can come out of this, a new kind of conversation about these issues. I agree with Ajmal that there is no excuse and no justification whatsoever for the rioting and what we're seeing. And I think that's Stephen's position as well, as I understand it. I would go further, though. I think that Ajmal has said to us, let's not talk about this, the problem and in particular the solutions, in a way that is going to fuel polarization and division. What I would like to say is I think this is a moment where we need to unite. Yeah, I mean, fine, everybody's going to come forward and want to make their political points and say things that they've been saying for a long time. And this is not a new discourse from Stephen. What I like about what Stephen said is the emphasis of trying to have an inclusive dialogue. And as you said, Andrea, as Stephen said, as I did, that this has been a long time coming. And those problems in white working-class communities are there. But there's another problem, too, that's been a long time coming. And that is the way in which politicians have talked about the migration issue. Because it's been far too easy to say that the reason you have got a job or haven't got the skills to do a job or are alienated or impoverished in this way is because of the migrants, is because of migration. And that is absolutely untrue. And extreme right-wing politicians, and I have to say, Stephen was not one of them. Stephen left the UKIP party over their immigration policy, but he knows, I'm sure, who I'm talking about, have been doing that. And that whips up hatred, racial hatred, divides things, and in no way contributes towards the long-term solution, Andrea, that you're asking me about. So I think what we have to do is actually empower migrant and refugee communities themselves so that they have a voice, so they're part of this conversation. And yes, let's do what Stephen says, have an inclusive conversation, but you don't do that by blaming them, by playing the blame game, and you certainly don't do it by blaming migrants.
Unfortunately, we've been seeing that provocation and polarization, blaming migrants in countries now around the world. It's become a pivotal issue in too many campaigns, and it's a lot of fear-mongering in a lot of ways. But Ajmal, I have to ask you, because when we talk about empowering minority communities, migrant communities, where has all of this of the recent 2 weeks left the Muslim community in the UK? I've even heard, in spite of this being summer vacation now for many families, they're even hesitant to go outside. They're actually that scared now of their community around them. How bad, how detrimental for the longer term has this been?
Thank you very much again for raising this issue. I have been approached by mosques up and down the country asking if we should close down our mosques. I have received messages from parents asking, should we bring our children to the mosque for the evening classes? We have had parents asking for a closure of the mosque on a Friday because they think by going to Friday prayers, which is the biggest gathering, they'll be attracting unnecessary attention. And also, obviously, cities upon cities, names and streets and areas where these thugs were targeting to attack. We were very afraid that these so-called protests, if they materialize, would be polarizing, would be creating more fear in our society, in our community. So we mobilized our masses, and in many parts of the country, hundreds of Muslims and non-Muslims. And I'll give you one example. Abdullah Quilliam Mosque, which is Britain's first mosque in Liverpool, established by a white Anglo-Saxon Liverpudlian gentleman by the name of Henry William Quilliam in 1887. That mosque was targeted by the same thugs. About 30 or 40 of them turned up, with 300 to 400 local Liverpudlians, majority of them are non-Muslims, who came to defend the mosque. And after a couple of hours of protesting from the other side and this side, we then decided, okay, these guys are cold, they're looking hungry and thirsty, let's give them some food. We went over with trays of food and drinks, and they were shocked that we were giving them food. the very people that they came to protest against and complain. And we asked these people the same question. When you go to the hospital, what do? Your doctor most likely is going to be a Muslim. What do you go to a pharmacist when the pharmacist is most likely is going to be a Muslim? What are you going to do when you go to a restaurant? The food that you would be eating, either Turkish or Asian, most likely is going to be a Muslim. What do? Your cab driver, Uber driver is a Muslim. These guys couldn't stop laughing at the irony of the discussion that we were having and simply the abysmal level of ignorance that they had. So there is a lot of ignorance, misunderstanding, mistrust, but often whipped up by politicians and media and not dealt with severely and adequately. And secondly, there is an issue that I want to pick up on. I'm really sorry, Stephen, I'm not attacking you, but language is very important. When you quote selectively George Orwell's statement about how privileged classes or the political class prefer the minority ethnic, that in itself will be used by these racist thugs as a reason for them and a justification for them to attack. Look, we feel, and I have grown up in the 70s in East End of London, bottles were broken on my face. I still have the scars to prove it. My parents' home was destroyed by white racist thugs. Our home, our work, everything was abysmal in the 70s. I thought we dealt a severe blow to racism then. But now my children are growing up and asking me this question, Daddy, what have we done? Why are they attacking our mosques? Why are they attacking our people? Why are they chasing people down the road? And I can't answer them because we are seeing the same ugly faces of racism coming back. We're all in it together. The deprivation in our country, the poverty, the abysmal failure of our politician to manage our economy.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, yeah, I need you to respond to that. And also what Roger was alluding to, or actually stating rather clearly, not alluding to, about the provocateurs in these cases on the right, on the far right, and not least, the fact that Brexit was really based on getting British borders under control. There was going to be no more migration. That was a false sell.
Well, look, some have argued that I'm being provocative on the right with my Centre for Migration when I talk about numbers and when I talk about the costs of large-scale migration, both legal and illegal. And I think that the biggest issue that we faced, first of all, during the late 90s and the end of the Tony Blairs and the early 20s, is that anyone that wanted to talk about controlling migration in one form or another, whether, as I say, legal or illegal, was always hit with the epithet that you were racist or xenophobic. So you've had to try and get through that. Now, it's well known and well documented. I had my own disagreements with Nigel Farage, particularly when he showed the poster of the lines of people behind him in Smith Square during the Brexit campaign. But the policy paper I wrote for Leave.eu and was adopted to a certain extent from the government of the day, and even people like Jonathan Porter's, who was on the other side of the argument, recognized that the whole point about the immigration argument in Brexit was to allow it, first of all, to be treated equally, everybody to be treated. I didn't care whether you're an Indian doctor or a German doctor, you should have the right to come here. But the point was about control. And it was never about having no immigration at all in this country. No paper, no advocate for that ever said that whatsoever. And I am apologetic for people like Imam who had to suffer the same sort of racism. I too, during the 80s, unfortunately was buried under the ground by some Irish thugs who were shouting all sorts of names I wouldn't now repeat on this radio station. So it is something that's been there historically. But Brexit is not blamed for that. It was just an idea, a hope that we could try equal immigration to control it.
Okay, Roger, we are down to our last 2 minutes. I'll let you just, sum up your final thoughts here. And again, if you could address, where does this end? When you talk about those provocateurs, and we have people like Elon Musk saying, this is the inevitable civil war, 2 million followers on social media, or that viewed that on social media. It's been escalated. How can it be brought under control if we have unhelpful language like that going forward?
Thank you, Andrea. Well, Stephen talks about Brexit. Brexit was then, and this is now. And I think what we need to do now, and looking to the future, is come together in Britain as a community and recognise, as Ajmal has been telling us, the contribution that we all have to make, whatever our race, whatever our faith, whatever our situation, to making our communities stronger and standing united. And I've been impressed by the counter protests and the way in which communities have come out across Britain, and to show that, you know, what's been going on with these riots has nothing to do with British identity and British values. What happened to Ajmal in the 1970s, the day after Brexit, and what is happening today has nothing to do with being British, and everything to do with being violent and being criminal. And I think that Elon Musk probably needs to come to the UK a bit more often, because I think what he would find is that actually we are a strong nation because we unite around values, including the value of solidarity and equal treatment, and many values that I'm sure Stephen himself in his heart of hearts shares. And this, what we need to do now is actually come together, is to stand together, to support those communities, particularly Muslim communities that are under attack, and to say we are British, we believe in solidarity, in equal treatment. We are not going to stand back while our fellow citizens are attacked in this way. We see this as an attack on the whole community, and we're going to build a stronger Britain together. And as part of that conversation, I come back to the point, we must empower all communities and make sure that they have a voice. Okay. We don't want a civil war. We want a new conversation about Britain's future that we can all be a part of.
Roger Casale, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.